the lost cowboy. He spent a night in the home of 3 Apache widows. Jack Thompson had been riding through the Arizona desert since early morning. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, but it already promised a hot, dry day. Jack was a cowboy, born to the open land, familiar with the trails, the cattle, and the wind whipping across the plains. Yet, even for a man used to wide spaces and harsh conditions, today felt different. The desert stretched endlessly around him, a sea of sand, rocks, and dry shrubs shimmering under the brightening sun. Every ridge looked the same. Every canyon seemed to repeat itself, and the trail he had been following seemed to vanish as if swallowed by the earth. He had been tracking a small herd of cattle that had strayed from a nearby ranch. Jack knew the area well, but the desert could be deceptive. One moment a path might seem familiar, and the next, the wind could erase tracks or cover a landmark he relied on. He rode steadily, scanning the horizon, checking the sun's position to estimate direction. For hours, it seemed he was making progress, but when he stopped for a brief drink of water from his canteen, he realized the herd had vanished. Jack frowned, gripping the reins tightly. The familiar comfort of knowing where he was had slipped away. The desert had a way of testing a man's patience and skill. Jack had learned long ago that it was not just a place. It was a living, breathing challenge. He kicked his horse gently, urging it forward, hoping to spot some sign of life or a landmark. But the ground was barren, the heat rising in waves from the sand, making the air shimmer and his vision blur slightly. The horse snorted and stamped, uneasy under the relentless sun. Jack shaded his eyes and squinted into the distance. There, far off in the east, a dark shape moved briefly over the horizon. At first he thought it was one of the cattle, but as he approached he realized it was nothing he recognized. It was simply another rise of sand and rock, yet even this small detail seemed to mock his confidence. By midday the heat had become nearly unbearable. Jack's canteen was nearly empty, and he had already eaten the small lunch he had packed, some hard bread and salted meat. The sun burned down relentlessly, and every movement made sweat soak through his shirt and hat. He wiped his brow with a rough sleeve and tried to stay focused. The desert, he reminded himself, was dangerous not because it was cruel, but because it was indifferent. A man could survive if he stayed calm, if he paid attention, if he conserved water and energy. But if he panicked or rushed, the desert would quickly claim him as it had claimed many before.
As the afternoon stretched on, Jack began to feel the first stirrings of worry.
He had left the main trail earlier, hoping to cut across a shortcut to find the cattle faster. Now the shortcut had become a trap. Every hill looked the same. Every ridge seemed to lead nowhere. His horse, usually steady and patient, grew restless, pawing at the ground and flicking its tail. Jack tried to calm it, whispering quietly, but he could feel the tension in its muscles. The sand underfoot was shifting, and the little animal was tiring faster than he had expected. A faint wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and dried plants. Jack looked toward the horizon, hoping to see some familiar feature, a rock formation, a cactus, or even a distant tree, but there was nothing. Just sand, rocks, and the relentless sun. He slowed his horse, scanning carefully, trying to retrace his steps mentally. The world had shrunk to a small, narrow area around him, and the vastness beyond seemed endless. He felt a small flicker of fear. Not the kind that would freeze him in place, but the kind that made a man sharpen his senses and take every small detail seriously. By late afternoon, the wind grew stronger. Jack noticed a faint shimmer in the distance. At first he thought it was heat haze, but then the wind brought with it a soft cloud of dust, growing heavier and swirling in strange, unpredictable patterns. His heart sank when he realized what was coming. A sandstorm. The desert had many moods, and this was one of the harshest. Psst! The wind began to whip across the sand, stinging his face and cutting across the horse's eyes. Jack pulled his hat lower, tightened the reins, and tried to find shelter. But the landscape offered little. Rocks jutted up here and there, but no caves or hollows that could hide him. The storm hit fully within minutes. Sand whipped against his skin, stinging every exposed part. The wind roared in his ears. Jack urged his horse forward, but the ground beneath them was treacherous. Loose sand gave way under the horse's hooves, and sharp rocks threatened to twist an ankle. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Jack squinted, straining to see even a few feet ahead. Every instinct screamed at him to find shelter, but there was none. The desert seemed endless, and the storm seemed endless, and Jack felt small, insignificant, and entirely at the mercy of the world around him. Hours passed, or at least it felt that way. Time had little meaning in a desert storm. Jack pressed forward, guided by instinct more than sight. His mouth was dry, and every movement was exhausting. The horse stumbled several times, and each time, Jack nearly fell. He knew he had to keep moving, keep trying, keep searching. The thought of lying down in the sand and giving up crossed his mind briefly, but he pushed it away. That was not Jack Thompson's way. He survived because he refused to surrender. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jack noticed a faint glow, a small flicker of light through the dusty air. At first, he thought it was another trick of the storm, a mirage. But as he rode closer, the light grew steadier, warmer, and distinctly human. Smoke. Someone was tending a fire somewhere ahead. Relief surged through him, though it was tempered with caution. A man never assumed strangers were friendly, especially in the desert. He approached slowly, scanning the area for signs of danger, for any threat. Finally, Jack reached a narrow valley, shielded by rocky ridges on all sides. In the center, a small, modest dwelling appeared, a house built from wood and clay, simple but strong, with smoke curling from a small chimney. The sight of it filled Jack with hope he had not felt all day. His horse snorted and pawed at the ground, as if sensing safety. Jack guided the animal closer, still cautious but grateful. He knew he could not make it through another night in the open desert without water and food. The house, whoever lived there, was his only chance. Jack dismounted carefully, patting the horse and speaking softly to calm it. Every step toward the dwelling was slow and deliberate. He did not know who would answer the door, or if anyone would even be inside. Desert life was hard, and survival even harder. He had heard stories of travelers being turned away, or worse, but he also knew that the people who stayed in these remote places often had hearts shaped by necessity, tempered with compassion. A small door opened, and Jack caught a glimpse of figures inside. Shadows moved, and he could sense the presence of people, perhaps women, perhaps older, cautious, alert. Jack raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Hello!" he called, his voice calm but carrying through the quiet valley. "I'm lost. I've been caught in the storm. Can you help me?" The figures hesitated, then slowly approached the door. Jack could see 3 women now, moving carefully but with steady confidence. They were not afraid of him, yet their eyes measured him carefully. Jack noticed their strength in their posture, the way they moved with purpose, and the quiet authority they carried. In that instant, he understood that these were women who had lived through hardship, who had learned to survive against all odds. Jack lowered his gaze respectfully. He did not try to explain his life or his troubles beyond what was necessary. The desert had taught him that humility and honesty mattered more than boasting or pleading. Bye.
I don't want trouble, he said softly. I just need some food, water, and shelter for the night. I'll be gone with the first light. The women exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable.
Then, slowly, one of them nodded, stepping aside to allow him entrance. Relief washed over Jack like a cool breeze. Psst. He thanked them quietly and stepped into the warm, dimly lit room. The air smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, simple but comforting. The storm outside still raged, but inside, for the first time that day, Jack felt the smallest sense of safety. Jack stepped carefully into the modest home, his boots making a soft sound against the wooden floor. The dim light from the fireplace flickered across the walls, showing simple but well-kept furnishings. It was a small home, not more than a few rooms, but everything had a purpose. Clay pots lined the shelves and hand-woven blankets hung neatly over benches. Jack could see a small area for cooking, and near it, a corner where a few dried herbs were tied in bundles. Everything spoke of careful living, of people who respected what they had and knew the value of every resource. 3 women stood in front of him, watching his every movement. They were not strangers to hardship, and their eyes told stories Jack could not yet imagine. Their faces were strong and lined with experience, and their movements were measured, showing a life that demanded attention and precision. Jack lowered his gaze slightly, a gesture of respect he had learned early in life when visiting families or townsfolk who valued tradition. He spoke softly, careful not to startle them. "Thank you for letting me in. I'm Jack Thompson," he said. "I was lost in the desert. He paused, uncertain how much to explain. "I need shelter for the night. I will leave at first light." One of the women stepped forward, bow. She was the eldest, her hair streaked with silver, but her posture was straight, her movements precise. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes steady and unwavering, bound. Finally, she nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and spoke in a calm, firm voice. "You may stay. But you will follow our rules. You will not touch what does not belong to you. You will respect our home." Jack nodded quickly, grateful for even this small acceptance. "Of course," he said. "I promise." He could feel the tension in the room slowly ease, though only slightly. The other 2 women relaxed their stance, though they still watched him closely. One of them, younger than the others, moved to the fireplace and added a small stick to the fire. The room glowed warmer instantly, and the shadows shifted across their faces. The youngest widow, perhaps in her late 20s, finally spoke. "Bye. You are far from home, Cowboy. The desert is not kind. Few survive without help." Jack nodded again, feeling a deep sense of humility. He had faced harsh conditions before, but never had he felt so completely vulnerable. The desert had stripped away his usual confidence, leaving only the raw need for survival. He lowered his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've traveled many miles," he admitted.
But today, the desert seemed endless. I feared I wouldn't find my way out.
Bye.
The middle widow, quiet until now, finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "The desert tests all who enter.
It shows your weaknesses and your strengths. You survived because you did not give up. Psh! That counts for something." There was a pause as Jack absorbed her words. Bess. They were not just words of comfort. They were an acknowledgement of the struggle he had endured. The eldest widow gestured toward a small bench near the fire. "Sit, eat." Drink. Then we will talk, she said. One of the women brought forward a small bowl of water. Jack took it gratefully, sipping slowly, feeling the cool liquid wash away the dryness in his throat. Bay.
Another brought a piece of flatbread, rough but filling. Jack tore it carefully, mindful not to seem greedy.
He ate quietly, letting the simple meal restore his strength. As he ate, Jack's eyes wandered around the room. He noticed the care with which the widows had built their home. Every corner had purpose. Every item had a story. The walls were decorated with simple drawings, perhaps of animals or the land around them. Jack realized that this was more than a house. It was a testament to resilience, to a life lived deliberately and carefully, honoring the past while surviving in the present. Bay. When Jack had finished, the eldest widow spoke again. You have traveled far and endured much. But you must understand, you are in our home. You will not leave until the sun rises. Outside, the desert is still dangerous. The wind will continue to test you. Breaths. Jack nodded, understanding her warning. He had been reckless, venturing too far without preparation, and he knew the desert would not forgive mistakes. The three widows then began to ask questions. They did not interrogate him harshly, but their curiosity was clear. Where are you from? Asked the middle widow. What brings you here? Jack answered honestly, explaining about the herd of cattle, the shortcut he had tried, and the sandstorm that had caught him unprepared. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words, aware that honesty was his best path to trust. The youngest widow listened with quiet interest.
You are brave, she said finally.
Few would face the desert alone like that, and yet you also respect the land. That is important. Jack felt a warmth at her words, not just from the fire, but from the recognition that his struggles had meaning, that his effort had not been in vain. The conversation turned slowly to the widows themselves. Jack asked about their lives, though carefully understanding that these were private matters. Breath. They shared small details, how they cared for one another, how they managed the land, and how they survived after losing their husbands. Their words were measured, never complaining, always practical. Jack realized that each story carried quiet strength, a way of enduring the hardships of life without letting bitterness take root. Jack noticed small acts of care as they spoke. One of the widows adjusted a blanket near the fireplace, ensuring it would keep the room warm through the night. Another checked the cooking area, arranging tools neatly. The third, eldest, kept her eyes on Jack, not in suspicion, but in quiet evaluation, ensuring he would respect their home. Jack was struck by how coordinated and thoughtful their actions were. He had never seen such seamless cooperation, and he admired the dignity in their everyday life. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. Jack felt the first true sense of safety he had experienced in over a day. The desert was still beyond the walls of the home, still harsh and unrelenting, but inside there was warmth, light, and the careful presence of people who had survived unimaginable challenges. Jack understood that he was not just a guest. They were offering him more than food and shelter. They were offering a temporary reprieve from the indifference of the world outside. As the fire crackled, Jack and the widows began to share small stories. Jack spoke of life on the ranch, the challenges of guiding cattle across difficult terrain, and the unpredictability of weather and animals. The widows listened, occasionally asking questions, always with interest, but never interrupting. In return, they shared their experiences, not in a boastful or mournful way, but in a manner that revealed both caution and wisdom. Jack realized that these women had mastered survival, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, Jack felt a connection forming, There was mutual respect, built on honesty, humility, and a recognition of each other's strengths. The desert had brought them together, placing a man who relied on courage and instinct with women who relied on resilience and careful knowledge of their land.
In that moment, Jack felt something he rarely did. He felt at home, even in a place so foreign, surrounded by strangers.
Night deepened, and the wind outside continued to howl, rattling the wooden beams of the house and causing the fire to flicker. Jack felt fatigue creeping in, yet his mind remained alert. Best. He observed the widows, noting the way they moved quietly, the way they seemed to anticipate each other's needs without words. Their lives were disciplined yet gentle, tough yet caring. Jack realized that survival did not require constant struggle alone. It could also be found in harmony, in cooperation, in understanding the rhythms of life around you. Eventually, the eldest widow gestured toward a corner where blankets and simple bedding had been laid out. Sad. Jack understood it was time to rest. He thanked them quietly, and they nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his gratitude. As he lay down, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant roar of the storm, Jack felt a profound sense of reflection. But more importantly, he had found a brief sanctuary in the lives of people who had endured far more than he ever had. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and restorative. Jack dreamed not of cattle or storms, but of quiet strength, of women who had lost much yet carried themselves with dignity, and of a home in the desert that offered safety, warmth, and an unexpected kindness. For the first time in many hours, he felt completely at peace, knowing that he was in capable hands, and that the morning would bring new challenges, but also new understanding. The next morning, Jack awoke to a quiet house. The storm outside had passed, leaving the desert calm, though the wind still whispered softly through the rocks and sand. Sunlight filtered through small windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden floor. Jack stretched and rubbed his eyes, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long day and night of travel and worry. For the first time in many hours, he felt rested. But he also felt quiet curiosity. The night had been peaceful, but he wanted to learn more about the women who had offered him shelter. He rose carefully, trying not to disturb the small household. The eldest widow was already awake, tending to the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and dried fruits. The youngest and middle widows moved quietly, arranging their tools, sweeping the floor, and checking small pots of water. Everything they did was deliberate, careful, and filled with purpose. Jack realized that this household ran like a well-practiced team, each woman knowing exactly what to do and how to do it without needing to speak much. Jack took a seat near the fire, watching as the women moved. He wanted to help, to do something in return for their kindness, but he also knew that hospitality had its rules. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's generosity was to be respectful and observant. The eldest widow noticed his gaze and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging his understanding. It was a small gesture, but it made Jack feel welcomed.
After a few moments of quiet, the youngest widow approached him with a small cup of warm water.
"Drink," she said softly. "You will need your strength if you are to leave safely today."
Jack took the cup, feeling the warmth spread through his hands and throat.
"Thank you," he said. "I am truly grateful for everything you have done."
"Last night you saved me." The youngest widow smiled faintly, a gesture full of quiet pride and dignity.
But she turned back to the fire, stirring the porridge gently, but Jack could feel that their conversation had begun. A connection formed from gratitude and respect. Once breakfast was ready, they all sat together on low benches near the fire. The middle widow served the porridge, handing Jack a small bowl. Jack ate carefully, savoring each bite. The food was simple, but hearty and nourishing.
More importantly, it carried with it the warmth of the home and the care of the women who had prepared it.
He felt a profound appreciation for the simplicity of their lives, the way they found contentment and strength in what they had, rather than longing for what was lost. As they ate, conversation began naturally. Jack, realizing that his hosts might not be comfortable speaking freely at first, shared small, careful stories from his life as a cowboy. He spoke of the long days guiding cattle, of rivers to cross, of storms that had threatened his herds. Psst. He spoke not of grand adventures, but of the quiet, steady struggles that defined his life. He noticed the widows listening intently, their eyes focused, their expressions calm but engaged. After some time, the eldest widow began to speak of her own experiences. Bah! Her voice was steady, but there was a depth in it that drew Jack in. She spoke of the life she had lived with her husband before he passed, of the times they had worked together on the land of planting, hunting, and providing for their family. She spoke of loss with neither bitterness nor sorrow, but with a kind of acceptance that was almost awe-inspiring. Jack listened carefully, realizing that her words carried lessons about resilience, about enduring hardships without losing dignity. The middle widow added her voice, sharing stories of the challenges they had faced after becoming widows. She spoke of the long, lonely days, the nights when the desert felt especially unforgiving, and the ways in which they had learned to rely on each other. Jack was struck by the subtle strength in her words. She did not speak of fear, only of the persistence required to survive. He realized that these women had lived lives filled with danger, isolation, and hardship, yet they had found ways to thrive despite it all. The youngest widow then shared her experiences. She spoke of learning skills from the older women, how to cook with limited resources, how to find water, how to care for small gardens in the harsh desert. Best, she spoke of community, of the small joys that came from simple tasks, and of the pride in being able to manage a home entirely on her own. Jack listened, fascinated. He had faced tough times in the wild, but never had he seen strength so quiet, so unassuming, yet so complete. As they spoke, Jack began to share more of himself, not just as a cowboy, but as a man who had faced hardships in his own way. He spoke of times he had been lost, times when the land seemed to conspire against him, and how he had learned to rely on both instinct and patience. He told them about his family, about life on the ranch, and about the lessons he had learned from the wide open spaces. The widows listened with a kind of quiet respect, nodding occasionally, their expressions thoughtful. During their conversation, Jack noticed small details about the women that spoke volumes. The way the eldest widow's hands moved as she braided hair or prepared food. The way the middle widow's eyes flicked to notice even the smallest changes in the room. The way the youngest widow's voice carried subtle notes of care and encouragement. Jack realized that their strength was not just in survival, but in the way they had cultivated a life filled with purpose, kindness, and resilience. Hours passed, and the conversation began to deepen. Jack asked about the land surrounding them, curious how they had survived so well in a place that seemed so harsh. The widows spoke of the desert with a quiet reverence. They told him about plants with healing properties, about small springs hidden among rocks, and about the ways they had learned to read the wind and sky to predict changes in weather. Jack listened, amazed at the depth of their knowledge. The desert, he realized, was not merely a challenge. It was a teacher, and these women were its students. The eldest widow shared stories of their husbands, not in grief, but as a way to pass on memories and wisdom. Jack realized that their past losses had shaped them, but had not defined them. Instead, they had turned those experiences into lessons and survival skills. The middle widow spoke of the importance of unity, of how they had learned to depend on one another without losing individuality. The youngest widow shared stories of humor and light moments, small joys that made the hardships bearable. Jack realized that laughter, even in difficult times, was a survival skill in itself. By midday, the sun was high in the sky and the air in the house was warm. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the shelter and food, but for the chance to witness lives so full of strength and dignity. He had been lost in the desert, physically and emotionally, but now he felt a sense of belonging, even if only temporary. He realized that trust was being built slowly, that human connection could be found even in the most unexpected places. The widows noticed Jack's attention to detail and began to share more practical lessons. They taught him how to identify edible plants, how to find clean water in dry conditions, and how to read subtle signs in the environment. Jack absorbed every word, realizing that even as a man who had survived many days in the wild, there was always more to learn. The desert had many lessons, and these women were wise teachers. As the afternoon wore on, Jack felt a profound change in himself. He had arrived at their home exhausted, weary, and anxious. Now, he was calm, thoughtful, and reflective. The widows had shown him that strength was not just about courage or skill, but about wisdom, patience, and care for others. Jack realized that this brief encounter would stay with him for the rest of his life. Toward evening, Jack helped with small tasks around the house, not out of necessity but out of respect. He carried water from a small container to the cooking area, helped gather kindling for the fire, and even tried to braid a simple rope under the guidance of the middle widow. Bah. She smiled faintly at his efforts, correcting him gently, but her patience and teaching filled Jack with admiration. He realized that true knowledge was shared with care, and that learning from someone required humility. When night fell again, the three widows gathered around the fire once more, and Jack joined them. The firelight flickered across their faces, highlighting the lines of experience, the quiet confidence, and the unspoken bond forming between them. Jack spoke little, listening more than talking. He noticed how the widows communicated without words, how a glance or gesture conveyed meaning, and how they had built a life of cooperation and understanding. He felt honored to witness it. That night, Jack went to sleep with a deep sense of reflection. He had learned more in this one day than he had in many months traveling alone. The stories of the widows, the lessons of the desert, and the quiet strength of human connection had left an impression on him that he knew would never fade. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that survival was not only about enduring hardships, but also about respecting the lives and wisdom of those around you. The morning arrived quietly, without the storm that had brought Jack to this hidden home. A sunlight poured into the small dwelling, warming the wooden floor and illuminating the simple but carefully arranged room. Jack awoke slowly, feeling a mix of gratitude and melancholy. The desert outside was still vast and intimidating, but inside this home he had discovered something unexpected: safety, kindness, and wisdom from three women who had faced far greater challenges than he ever had. Jack dressed carefully, patting the horse that had spent the night tied outside. The animal looked calm and well-fed, a testament to the care of the widows. Jack ran his hand along its mane and whispered softly, feeling a connection not only to the animal but to the home that had sheltered him. He had learned the value of patience and attentiveness from the women, and now he was carrying that lesson in how he treated every living being around him. The eldest widow entered the room carrying a small bundle of dried herbs. Her presence was steady, and her expression calm. She regarded Jack with a quiet intensity, as if reading his thoughts. "You will need this," she said, handing him the bundle. "It will help if the desert winds grow strong again."
"Keep it close, and use it wisely."
Jack accepted the herbs with a respectful nod, sensing that this gesture was more than practical advice. It was a symbol of trust and care, a gift from women who understood hardship.
The middle widow approached, offering a small portion of dried fruit in a water flask. "Take this for the road," she said softly. "It may seem little, but it will sustain you if you are delayed. The desert is full of surprises." Jack thanked her, noticing the gentle pride in her voice. These women had endured so much and yet continued to give to others with no expectation of return. He felt humbled. The youngest widow came last, her eyes bright with quiet curiosity. "You have learned much," she said. "Remember what we have shown you. The desert will test you, but it will also reward the careful and patient."
Jack smiled faintly, feeling a warmth he could not fully describe.
Her words carried a wisdom he knew he would not forget. Jack spent the next hour preparing to leave. He checked his gear carefully, ensuring he had the essentials: water, a small amount of food, and the herbs and guidance given to him by the widows. As he did, he glanced around the house one last time. Every corner, every simple object reminded him of their careful lives, the balance between survival and dignity, hardship and harmony.
He realized that he was leaving not only a home but also a profound lesson about living with purpose and respect.
Before mounting his horse, Jack turned to the three widows. "I cannot thank you enough," he said earnestly. "Right. You have saved me, fed me, and shown me wisdom I never expected to find in the desert. I will carry this day and your lessons with me for the rest of my life." But the eldest widow nodded slowly. "Go carefully," she said. "Remember what you have learned. Respect the land, and it will respect you."
Jack mounted his horse, feeling a mixture of excitement and reflection.
The desert stretched before him, vast and unending, but he no longer felt the same fear that had gripped him when he had been lost. He remembered the wind that had nearly blinded him, the sand that had threatened to wear him down, and the darkness that had loomed around every ridge. And yet he also remembered the warmth of the fire, the careful hands of the widows, and the quiet wisdom shared in conversation. As he rode away, Jack took one last glance at the dwelling nestled in the valley. Browned. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, curling toward the clear blue sky. The three widows watched him go, their faces calm and dignified, but Jack could sense the same pride in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. He realized that this brief encounter had changed him more than any cattle drive, any long day in the saddle, or any challenge he had faced before. The ride through the desert was still demanding. The sun climbed high, the sand shimmered under its heat, and every ridge and canyon could still be deceptive. Yet Jack felt a renewed sense of confidence, patience, observation, and respect. He noticed the subtle signs of water sources, the way the wind shifted, the patterns in the sand. All knowledge he had absorbed from watching the widow's careful attention to their surroundings. Each step of his journey became deliberate, guided by wisdom rather than fear.
As the day progressed, Jack thought often about the stories the widows had shared.
He recalled the quiet strength of the eldest, the disciplined coordination of the middle, and the thoughtful curiosity of the youngest. Each had taught him something unique about surviving, about living fully, and about treating others with dignity and respect. The memory of their lives and their shared home became a steady presence in his mind, a guiding influence as he navigated the harsh landscape.
Jack also reflected on his own life.
He realized that he had often rushed through challenges relying solely on skill and instinct, without truly learning from his surroundings or appreciating the small moments of care and wisdom offered by others. The experience with the widows had opened his eyes to a different way of living, a life that balanced strength with patience, independence with cooperation, and action with reflection. By late afternoon, Jack reached a familiar ridge, a place he recognized from his earlier travels. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the desert. He paused for a moment, letting the wind cool his face and listening to the quiet rustle of sand and distant rocks. He felt a sense of gratitude deeper than any he had experienced before. The desert had tested him, but the widows had guided him, not through direct instruction, but through example, through the quiet presence of their strength and humanity. As he continued, Jack thought about how rare it was to encounter such people in life, those who lived fully, who understood hardship, and who could teach without judgment. He realized that this day, this brief time in the hidden home of the three Apache widows, was a gift he would carry forever. It had changed him, not by making his path easier, but by showing him the value of resilience, humility, and respect. As evening approached, Jack found a small outcrop of rocks to rest for a moment. The desert was alive with color, the reds and oranges of the setting sun blending with the muted browns and yellows of sand and stone. He thought about the widows and the home he had left behind. Though he would never forget them, he also understood that life moves forward, and that the lessons of the desert would continue to guide him long after the journey ended. Night fell, and Jack made camp under a cluster of mesquite trees. He tended to his horse, ensuring it had water and food from the small supplies given to him by the widows. As he lay beside the fire, the stars spread across the sky like a vast, glittering blanket. Jack thought about the enormity of the desert, the smallness of himself, and the profound impact of the brief encounter he had experienced. He realized that life was not measured solely by the challenges one survived, but also by the lessons learned from those who had endured far more. The fire flickered and danced, casting shadows on Jack's thoughtful face. Barras. He felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion, yet he had also witnessed courage, wisdom, and kindness. The three Apache widows, with their careful lives and quiet strength, had taught him more than any journey through mountains, rivers, or plains ever could. They had shown him the value of observation, the power of resilience, and the importance of respect for others and the world around him. When he finally drifted into sleep, Jack dreamed not of the cattle he had sought or the dangers he had faced, but of the home in the valley, the firelight dancing across the walls, and the gentle, watchful presence of the three widows. Their lives, their stories, and their strength had left an indelible mark on him. He knew that the memory of this day would shape him, not only as a cowboy navigating the vast desert, but also as a man living in a world that often tested patience, humility, and compassion. The next morning, Jack awoke early and continued his journey with renewed determination. The desert ahead was still challenging, but he felt ready. Every step he took carried the lessons of the widows with him. The value of careful observation, the importance of patience, the strength found in community, and the quiet dignity of resilience. He rode steadily, aware of the wind, the sun, and the subtle signs of the land, confident that he would reach his destination safely. Weeks later, Jack would return to his ranch, sharing stories of the desert and the storm, of survival and courage. But the most important story he carried was not of danger or fear. It was of the hidden home in the valley, of three Apache widows who had offered shelter, food, wisdom, and humanity to a lost cowboy. He would remember their faces, their quiet voices, and the lessons they had imparted without needing to demand attention. Those lessons would guide him for the rest of his life, a reminder that true strength is often found in kindness, observation, and respect. Even years later, when the desert seemed calm and ordinary, Jack could close his eyes and see the flickering fire, smell the herbs, and feel the warmth of a home that had appeared when he needed it most. The memory of that night and day, spent in the care of the three Apache widows, would never fade. It was a story of survival, yes, but more than that, it was a story of human connection, of learning from those who had endured, and of discovering the quiet power of kindness in the most unexpected places. Jack Thompson, the cowboy who had once been lost and weary, had found much more than shelter in the desert. He had found a reminder of what it meant to live fully, to respect others, and to carry the lessons of humanity wherever the journey might take him next. And as he rode toward the horizon, the wind at his back, and the memory of the hidden valley in his heart, he knew that the desert had tested him. But the wisdom of the three widows had guided him, and he would never forget it.